Merry Christmas, you beautiful bastards, and welcome to another episode of the Refined Savage podcast. As always, we're going to do a little bit of business here, and then we will get to the show. So let's talk about the online program first and foremost. It's really the only thing I have to sell you guys. It's $40 a month for the program. You get 6 of the programs. It's released every Sunday night, all 6 programs. The programs are suited to whatever goal you might have. So there's a program suited for Highland Games and track and field and football type power athletes. We have a program called Gira, which is all kettlebells. We have a hard style program for all you guys stuck in quarantine. We have Showtime, which is our old school bodybuilding style program. Foundations is good for anyone who has a young athlete or coaches young athletes. So if you're a volleyball coach and need to figure out how to train your kids in the weight room, very effective, very easy way to do that. We have the Primal program, which is our program at the gym that we program every week. So you can get access to all 6 of those for $40 a month. We also have online virtual personal training too. So if you want a personalized program, depending on how much you want, how many days a week, that kind of stuff, and if you want throws coaching with that, we have we're very easily able to turn the program around and make it however you want it. So give us a holler. We can personalize that for you as well. But yeah, give us a shout at blinddoggym@gmail.com, and I will answer any questions you might have. Viking Coffee in the heart of Bowling Green, Ohio, with Evan Armstrong Brewing. They're just doing awesome stuff, man. Their coffee is out of this world. Check out their longboat flights. Pretty awesome. You get a sample pack of all their different coffees, and you can figure out which one you like best. My personal favorite is Old Man Strength, but all his stuff is just out of this world. My favorite, Viking Coffee. You can check them out at vikingcoffeeco.com. Use the code VikingCoffee10 at checkout. Cerberus has everything you need. If you're a Highland Games athlete, if you're a strongman, if you're a power lifter, any of these sports, Olympic lifting, bodybuilding, or if you're just training in your garage, man, Cerberus has everything you need to get stronger. Belts, wraps, straps, smelling salts, tacky, everything you possibly need. Give them a holler at cerberus-strength.us and use the code REFINEDSAVAGE10 at checkout for 10% off. Warrior CBD. CBD oil is all over the place. Everyone has their own brand of CBD oil. Warrior is my favorite, man. It's just really effective, good stuff. There's varying degrees of effectiveness for CBD oils out there. And like I've said before, most of the stuff you're buying in grocery stores and gas stations is absolute garbage. Check out Warrior CBD. I love their pain stick. I love their drops. My parents use the drops for their dog, and they love it. So we've gotten good results with that too. Give them a holler. WarriorCBDofficial.com and use the code Warrior20 off for 20% off. Serious Steel. Serious Steel has everything you need for your gym. No matter how big or small, they have all the equipment you could possibly use. They also have gear for lifting, like stone sleeves and belts and wraps and straps, t-shirts, everything you need. Serious Steel is the way to go. Their customer service is out of this world, and they are, just like all our companies, they are one of us. Give these guys a call first before you go anywhere else for your equipment needs. SeriousSteel.com. Use the code SAVAGE at checkout for 10% off. Stay Classy Meats, the best sent directly to you. If you guys been checking out my Instagram page and me posting these pictures from Stay Classy Meats, it's just amazing, man. It's like food porn. The beef is out of this world. The bison is out of this world. I had the bacon last night. Just amazing stuff. Everything they make is awesome. Small batch farms out of Bozeman, Montana. Animals are eating the way animals should. They're eating fresh Montana grasses, drinking from fresh Montana streams. They're humanely raised, humanely processed, and sent directly to your door. StayClassyMeats.com. Use the code SAVAGE at checkout. And finally today, the Breath Belt, the best piece of lifting equipment that's been out in the last decade. I love it. I'm a big fan. I keep seeing it pop up all over my Instagram page from people either getting it from this podcast or just getting in touch with Jesse themselves and getting their breath belts. Everyone who uses it loves it. I still don't know how it works. Doesn't matter. It works. It works for lifting. It works for running. It works for gymnastics. It's a great underbelt for all you strongman types out there. It's just a great piece of equipment. Give them a holler at thebreathbelt.com and use the code SAVAGE20, all caps, SAVAGE20 at checkout. All right, guys. Today on the show, here is your Christmas present. If you guys are defying government orders and making those long trips to see family and friends, I have got a treat for you. The one and only Derek Woodske and I sat down for a long conversation. We touched all the bases on everything that's going on today, everything from coronavirus to aliens and everything in between. So sit back and relax. Enjoy this one. I always have a good time talking to Derek, and this was no exception. This was a great, great podcast that I'm super proud to put out for Christmas as a Christmas present to all you good boys and girls. So sit back, relax, enjoy it, and we'll see you at the end.
Okay. All right, we're recording. Derek Woodske.
Pleasure. It's nice to be back on the show, as they say.
Second time. I think it's been almost a year because we were at the conference last year in Ashland.
Yeah, it is. We are literally 50 weeks out from when we did it last.
Okay. Yeah.
It was I think mid-December, December 18th or something like that.
Yep.
I have to think back, but it was in that week period. It's funny because since we spoke last, I've only had one business-related flight since.
Yeah, and that used to be your bread and butter, right? You were all over the place.
Yeah, I used to fly to the other side of the world every 30 days. And I did that off and on for, a decade. So it's really kind of strange. Like after I was out in Ashland, we sat down, did the Ashland event. I went out to Winter Strong in Columbia, South Carolina for Sornex. And then that was the last time I had a commercial flight. Wow. And that was February. And, I flew in a Cessna this summer. I flew this little held together plane into this backwoods camp for Everlystock in July. But this has been the strangest year in a decade for me. Now, there's some aspects of it that I can't deny, like not having to deal with the masses of an airport constantly is nice. Like, that kind of grinds on you after a long time of doing it. But at the same time, it just represents how catastrophically different life is now.
Yeah. And it came about so fast, and it's amazing to me how fast people pivoted.
Yes.
I think we're pretty similar in our thinking that I think we pivoted way too quickly.
Way too quickly.
Yeah.
And it's funny, and I think that's probably a good conversation to have today. Like, yesterday I made a post on social media that they were talking about rolling our little town back to what's referred to as purple in the state of California. What a purple, for those that don't realize it here, is things really get kind of slowed down. This whole idea that if you have less people inside buildings and you do these different things, it's going to stop the potentiation of the spread of a virus. However, when you go through and you look at everything that they propose, there's only 3 businesses that they close completely: gyms, bars, and nightclubs.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's a really strange thing to me. Now, I don't want to be a biased dickhead about it. I get why they're closing bars. Right. I understand that. Now, do I think it's necessary? I don't know. I'm not a virologist or, a pathologist, but yeah, it kind of makes sense. You jam a bunch of people together, they get a little inebriated. Maybe they don't pay attention to details. I get it.
Trying to get laid too. So wearing a mask. Right?
No one ever whispered a sweet nothing across the room. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't exist. So I get it. I get what they're trying to do there. And, I'm sleeved from fingertip to shoulder. So I'm a big fan of tattoos, but tattoo parlors are open in California under this setback. Right. And tattooing to me is a very intimate experience, mask or no mask.
Yep.
So how is that different than a gym like mine that now officially was closed today, where it was already operating at 10%, meaning which that's two people for our little like box style CrossFit 24-hour access gym. And the vast majority in a town like this are from the same household.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not like a bunch of strangers or two strangers rolling in together and working out. It's typically someone you know. So it's really strange. And the thing that's funny about what's happening here in Mammoth is they haven't closed the VRBOs, the rentals, or the Airbnbs. Now, in a town like this, because roughly 80% of the homes here are second homes or rentals, say, for example, in California this summer, our numbers for death rate were really high in July, right? They're not really high right now. The number of tests, positive tests, through the roof, right? But, you know, to give people context, let's say mid-July in California, 200 people a day, roughly, were succumbing to the virus on their statistics. Right now, we'll fluctuate from a high of 100 down to 20. You know, you look at California's mortality rate, we're like number 15 some days, or 20 in the country statewide, even though we have so many people.
Right.
So this summer when we were peaking, they didn't shut the town down, but they closed the same businesses. So our actual numbers in town were like plus 300 or 400% of occupancy.
Wow.
There were so many people in our town that campers were setting tents up behind like the grocery store next to a dumpster. The photos are online. And here we are up in the woods and we have people crapping in parking lots.
Yeah.
Because there was so many people that were trying to escape the rigidity of, say, LA County.
Right.
Right. Because we're the closest mountain town. And so that's happening again. And, you know, our numbers didn't spike in July here. It's not like we had a massive increase in COVID. You know, we've had 540 positive cases since March. That's it.
That's super low.
It's super low. And you know what they don't talk about is the fact that 256 of those cases happened 3 weeks ago in a confined, isolated event at Pickle Marine Base up in the High Mountain Altitude Training Center. Those people aren't a part of our town, but they're a part of Mono County. Yeah. So, you know, when I look at all of this, not to go down a conspiracy dark hole, but I have to start to step back, because if people remember what I was talking about on social media in March last year, I made a post one day just off the cuff. And I'm kind of middle of the road Canadian that moved to America. So I probably, you know, when I do all the psychological testing, I lean libertarian with central to conservative fiscal values, right? That's kind of where I sit. I'm in the
same boat.
Yeah. When I've done that test a million times, and that's where I pop out. Kind of this, you know, let's have a moderate to small government and a strong defensive military mindset, right? So, you know, having worked in the Middle East for 7 years, probably not a whole lot of reason to be over there. You know what I mean? Especially knowing that we're the largest petroleum producer in the world now, if people actually just paid attention. So when I look at a lot of this stuff and I look at what's happening, I can't help but notice the fact that, you know, like Trump, hate Trump, love Biden, hate Biden, doesn't matter what you think. It sure starts to appear to the uneducated eye that they release vaccine information. And it seems like everything with this is so perfectly released. They release vaccine information, and then almost 2 weeks to the day, Fauci comes out and says he was wrong about the data with kids in school, and that the kids should be going back, and that they're not spreaders. This is all stuff Europe has been talking about for 7 months. Yeah. Right. And so now all of a sudden he's rolling back his narrative, and the media sources pick up on it and just start pumping it. Right. And it's around the same time now that vaccines are, if I understand correctly, are actually being administered. Right. So this is all starting to correlate. And what I see happening with this whole fiasco of an election this year is we're going to get a new administration in January, and they've already preemptively started to talk people's brains into accepting the fact that this virus is going away. And then they can stand on this like ivory tower and point back in time at the dark cloud, which was the previous administration's blunder.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
But you can see they're already starting to program people to get past it.
And it's so easy to program them. They just suck up anything that's thrown at them.
Mm-hmm.
And if you follow history at all, every prior, pandemic that we've had, but be it the Hong Kong flu or the first SARS, or
Yep.
You always had a second wave. So it doesn't just hit you and then go away. So this was very easy to predict and see coming, and then create a timeline around it, I think the problem was that the Democrats or the liberals, whatever you want to say it, were a lot more mobile and a lot more flexible and used it a lot better. And Trump, the people he had around him, just did not know how to pivot.
No, they don't. My brother and I were talking about this last night. My brother works in an industry that is predominantly Republican based. And, the one thing that we were talking about last night was the fact that, love it or hate it, the Democrats definitely seem to have a lot more fight in them in terms of how they deal with this stuff. They fight dirty, if you want to call it dirty. Like, I mean, even as an outsider, this was the first election I've ever voted in because I finally became a citizen. Mm-hmm. So my introduction to American political voting was this disaster.
Yeah.
Right. So for me, it's really a strange experience because I feel like, well, Florida can rock out their vote count. California can rock out their vote count in like 5 hours. Ohio knocks theirs out in 6-7 hours. Millions and millions of votes. I'm neighbors, literally 20 miles away is the state of Nevada. And I can tell you conclusively, because I spend so much time in Nevada, that is not a Biden state.
Yeah.
I mean, you drive through Nevada, it is Trump country. But yet they can't get their votes counted and they got like 1 million. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I get it. Las Vegas is predominantly a Democratic city. I understand all those demographics that go into shifting a voting populace. But the idea that Nevada is this pro-Biden place, I'd have to go back and look, and I don't want to speak out of my ass, but I'm pretty sure he didn't step foot in the state of Nevada when he was trying to become a Democratic president.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. Well, I mean, this was the perfect setup for him because you could keep him in a basement.
Yep.
You could keep him and just blame it on the virus, and he didn't have to speak. And I mean, anybody. Look, the bottom line is we had not just a liberal section of the country who wanted Trump out, but you had a vast majority of the establishment Republicans, the establishment Republicans wanting Trump out. So they're not screaming, down the hall that he got screwed. Whether he gets screwed or not, I don't know. But
yeah,
it's Trump versus the world. It's not Republicans versus Democrats.
No, it's really not. And I think we're going to see when we look back on how this year's kind of unfolded. So everyone always has a tendency with conspiracy theories to think that they're this really incredible methodical plan that this super genius created.
Right. Yeah.
And it's been my experience, and I saw it overseas with the Saudi roundup, because I was in Saudi for the Ritz-Carlton prisons, right? That I don't know if you heard those stories when they made it to the West about how they took all the Saudi royalty and put them in a Ritz-Carlton prison.
No.
Well, okay, so in 2000, what would have been? Is it 2017 already? So when the new crown prince, the young kid, the son of the current king, kind of in a modern day coup, like jumped a lot of steps and forced people out and consolidated power, which he's now done to a degree. And don't get me wrong, he's modernized some aspects of Saudi that needed to be modernized under his, Western philosophy. But he's also the guy that is directly connected to the Khashoggi incident, right, in Turkey. So there's a lot of stuff happening there that needs to be addressed. But with that being said, the Ritz-Carlton, which is at the time was one of the most beautiful Ritz-Carltons in the world, they just closed it, turned it into a prison, right? Literally a prison. And how I know this is because I was a Ritz-Carlton resident the week before it became a prison, right? So, and so what they did, it was kind of a miraculous that they did it this way. They took the entire prison that probably, or the entire hotel that probably holds a few hundred residents in this, like, it's beautiful. So they took the hotel, closed it, put 200 plus Saudi royals in it for an undetermined amount of time. And people are like, you know, in the West, we're so delusioned. We're like, yeah, but it's the Ritz-Carlton prison, right? Because that's what they used. And it's like, well, yeah, but they also took all the shower curtain rods down because people were hanging themselves. Because prison's prison.
Sure,
right?
Yeah.
And there's a few guys that didn't make it out alive from the Ritz-Carlton. So there's some stuff that people just like were so easily manipulated and so misdirected, right? But what I think is we're going to look back on this period of time, and to my point about conspiracy theories not being this perfect scenario, is what ends up happening is something catastrophic occurs or some sort of event occurs, you know, like in our history in America when we were attacked. That's a catastrophic event. Now, people will be like, yeah, but it's a giant, and then go through this list of variables that make it a conspiracy theory with 2020 hindsight. And it's like, no, that is just the reality of what happens when something catastrophic occurs. Yeah. We can go back and look at all this stuff. And so what we're going to see now as we look back on this probably 5 years from now, be like, I told you it was a conspiracy theory. This happened and this happened and this happened. It's like, no, probably not. Probably what it was a bunch of shitty people taking advantage of a vulnerable time.
Yep.
You know, it's happened over and over in history. Some catastrophic event occurs, and the people that know how to, you know, pivot and react negatively to a situation, or maybe like an Amazon that reacts to the pandemic, and everyone, you know, I'm rambling, but everyone thinks that Amazon is behind the pandemic. And because Jeff Bezos owns Washington Post, he's promoting the pandemic. Okay, he didn't create the pandemic. He just knew how to benefit from the pandemic.
Which is the reason why he's Jeff Bezos and we're sitting here talking on these shitty computers. You know, he knows how to do that shit.
He knew how to do it. He knew how to be like, okay, so a lot of people are going to be stuck at home. How do I use my newspaper to manipulate a narrative, or not even manipulate? How do I just keep promoting the worst part of the thing?
Yeah.
And the worst part of the thing keeps getting talked about. People stay in their house, they get depressed, and they buy shit they don't need.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you're absolutely right. Whether it was 9/11 or any of this stuff, you know, we get 9/11, we get to invade Iraq, we get to, you know, put the Patriot Act in place.
Yep.
I don't see any of that shit as they blew up the towers so they could put this shit in place. The towers got blown up and then they put that shit in place.
Yep. I've always looked at it that way. It's like the only mistake that we made back in 9/11, and I was in Ypsilanti, Michigan at the time, working at Eastern Michigan when that happened. I remember coming into work and just, you know, what is happening? The mistake that we made is we probably got a little loose in how we were tracking terrorists in our country.
Yeah.
You know, so which inevitably leads to the Patriot Act and some of this other stuff that has prevented a lot more terror attacks than it's infringed on our rights. If we were to probably measure it out, you know, you know, they started listening to way too many telephone calls, you know, like there's shit like that we can't deny. But at the same time, you know, it's, you know, when you look at something like 9/11 and how horrific it was, it does make me kind of wonder how many more terrorists were on American soil setting that up that we don't know about. You know, like they talk about all the other buildings collapsing, and they collapsed in controlled detonations, and that had to have been an inside job. Yeah, it's called inside job of terrorism. And what people don't want to talk about is the fact that these clever fucks come over here and kind of blend into a society for a decade, speak the language, get the jobs, work for a construction crew, you know, get it, you know, have no problem spending 10 years working construction for the city of New York, right? And people don't even notice the guy in the blue overalls with the drills and the suitcases and the tool cases walking in and out of a tunnel underneath a building, because that's his job. What they didn't realize is that just like the dude from Shawshank Redemption that dug himself out of prison with a spoon, these guys have that same methodology with setting up catastrophe. And then
they're
one
playing
day,
that long game.
They're playing the long game. It's the same thing China's doing right now with the virus. It's the same thing that Iran is doing right now with cyber attacks on our country. It's the same thing that Russia has been doing.
Yeah.
They're not always going to run up and punch you in the face. But what they do is prepare for something that will massively disrupt all at once. And people have to like start to shift their thinking. It doesn't mean that there's terrorist cells in everyone's backyard, but there's a lot of terrorist cells in backyards, right? And that's the thing I learned working overseas, you know, and with all this political correctness garbage that we see in this country and PC speech, one of the most fascinating things I saw when I worked and lived in Saudi Arabia full time is when you read the Arab news, which was both in Arabic and in English, so you could buy one or the other. And so I would always glance through it. We were demonizing the terminology Islamic extremism here. Like you couldn't say it in the news, you couldn't say it on social media, you get shadow banned. But yet in Saudi Arabia, they use the term on the front of their newspaper, Islamic extremist, every day. Why? Yeah. Because that's what they were, right? Yeah. They were Islamic extremists because there's peaceful followers of Islam and there's extremist Islam. They understand it because they deal with it every single day. You know, shit, when my time in Saudi Arabia, within my presence, there was a bunch of bombers that got smoked by the police. And I remember hearing the AKs go off, and that was a crazy moment. I mean, shot at by missiles from Yemen. I had time to film a couple, which was disturbing that I got that comfortable with it. And they were all like Patriot systems intercepting the equivalent to a Scud missile, like buses falling on a city. And it's funny when I think back on that stuff, because it used to just always reiterate to me that we have it so good compared to other countries that for all intents and purposes are extremely westernized in their what we think of as a modern city. They got everything that we have. They have all the newest stuff, all the best technology, all the nicest buildings, extravagance. But yet, you know, every few days some radical shoots a bus-sized missile at it.
Yeah.
You know, it'd be like, you know, being Canadian, it's kind of ironic to say this, but it'd be like living in Ohio, where obviously I used to live as well. So imagine we're hanging out in Cleveland and somewhere in the outskirts of Winnipeg, because it would be quite a ways away, some farmers, right? Because that's about the equivalent of social development that we're dealing with, like just some rural farmers that are pissed off at the United States get their hands on a bus-sized missile. They kind of have rough coordinates of Cleveland, kind of, and they just send that shit. They just one day they're like, let it rip, and they do. And one day you hear a catastrophic explosion over a city of 1 million people. All the windows buckle in your apartment that you're living in, and you go outside and there's Patriots firing into the sky. And you're like, huh, well, I guess the rebels are attacking the empire again. Like it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I think you know, those places have that struggle. They have that whether it's a religious struggle or they're getting bombed or they're dealing with terrorists and trying to. We don't have that here for in reality, and I think that's why we get so focused on this bullshit political correctness where everything you can't say anything wrong. If you offend anyone, and the more popular you are and the more you apologize for shit you've done, you know, wrong in their eyes, the worse it gets. You know, it's the guys who just don't give a fuck who are Teflon in this. But if you care that you've offended somebody, you can get a lot of trouble.
Not only do you get in a lot of trouble, you carry a lot of the empathetic load too, right? So like you say something and then you start to see how these people in your mind or your emotions are being affected by it, not realizing that their response to it is fabricated.
Yeah.
Right? So you're having an emotional response to a fabricated emotion. And that I think is extremely unhealthy psychologically to people that get thrown into that scenario, you know, because if I had to see every negative emotional response, you know, over the course of a lifetime, and now that's what we see through technology, right? But if I had to go back to my athletic days where the internet was around, but it wasn't instantaneous.
Mm-hmm.
Like I remember when I first started blogging in like 2002-ish, 2003, even the response because it was all message board style response at the end of a post, it wasn't instantaneous. So people would have to read it typically at the end of a day or during lunch or whatever they were doing at work. They would get that time to read something I wrote. Then they would have to sit down and think about what they wanted to write. And then they would write it in a message board. And you might get inundated with someone's emotional response to something once a day.
Yeah.
You know, maybe it wasn't very significant, you know? And so then obviously like everybody, I switched over to Facebook, and I was on Facebook like everyone else. And that's where I was putting all my content. And even though people still say Facebook is still the best medium for business promotion, the reason I stopped using it is because the interaction was too immediate and too dramatic. Yes, right? So people on Facebook have no problem writing you a 1,200 word response. And you're just like, really? Like, holy shit. Okay. So then I stopped using Facebook and just started using only Instagram, to a detriment or not. The reason I did it is because people are innately lazy when it comes to that stuff. So if you take away the opportunity for ridiculous banter or the instant ability to erase their momentary life's work, it really is a massive deterrent. Right. So if I, make a post on Instagram that is slightly socially driven, right? So, I make an observation about something and people get pissed, which they have. It's like, if they get really unnecessarily offended and you just do that little swipe with the thumb and just hit the little trash can, and their emotion is immediately removed from your world,
right?
It fucks them up, right? Because it was so well thought out on their part to be so offensive and so easily removed, right? And so they're not as likely to do it. But with Facebook, there was just something different about how the interaction was. And so I stopped using it. And it's funny because I remember, I've been on Instagram for forever now. I can't remember how many thousands of words I've written, but I remember last year during the start of the pandemic, I wrote something that wasn't particularly like right or left leaning or anything like this, but I used the phrase cocksucker, right? Mm-hmm. And what was funny about it was I got this post shortly after, a direct message from somebody that was so offended by the use of the word. Like they were like they weren't even baiting me. They were trying to reprimand me as, you represent this, and so could be reading it, and this generation could be aware of it. And I'm just like, how disconnected is this person from me as a human? Yeah. They haven't realized that for almost 20 years, that is what I've done on social media. Yeah. And on top of it, it's like going back to Ashland in 2004, when this banker, this is so crazy, this banker comes into the gym because they had a special agreement with the university that they could use that facility during college athlete hours. They must have been a donor, right? Whatever. Yeah. And this guy comes in. I don't really know him. He's just one of the guys that you see in there, and the rest are college athletes. But, must be kind of a big deal. And so, after a couple months, he comes up to me and he just matter of fact, like looks me in the eye and he goes, "I fear that your tattoos will be a detriment to your future in this industry." And I remember just being like, it was like fucking Kill Bill when she's about to murder and all you hear is sirens. And I remember just being like, what are you talking about? Which actually opens up another Pandora's box of memories. And I remember at the time just like feeling concerned, like, what if this guy's right? He's quite wealthy. He's very successful in his world. It couldn't have been more off the mark, right?
Sure, right.
And it's that same type of overbearing mentality that shows up. And, you know, do you remember Springco Athletics?
Mm-hmm.
Back in the day?
Yep.
So I had a partial sponsor from Springco Athletics in like 2002. And so what a partial sponsorship from Springco would be was like $250 a quarter, right, in equipment. And they told me the same thing. They said that my tattoos at the time were going to be a detriment to me as a coach and as a professional in the future, right? And it's just this need for people. Now, back then, it used to happen in a conversation which you could deal with and address it. But that same underlying Dudley do-right PC attitude is now technological, or let's be honest, artificial intelligence, even to a big degree, and they can inundate you with that same energy so quickly and in such mass that, you know, call me crazy, but I think it's probably led to a lot of social depression and suicide.
Yeah. You know, when these people are, you have people, and I know people like this who will spend all day arguing on Facebook.
Yeah.
I mean, and how, whether they started off mentally ill or it's caused them to become mentally ill, I don't think it matters, but these are mentally ill people that can just sit there and fight all day long. I'm not on Facebook either. I got off probably about a year and a half ago, and it was such a relief. You know, I mean, first of all, it frees up so much time.
Yep.
And second of all, I don't get any of that interaction anymore. If you like one of my posts or make a comment, I just like I don't need negative, positive. I saw you made a comment. I just hit the like button. Thank you for responding, you know?
Yeah. Thank you for taking a moment to at least acknowledge that I'm trying to do something, right?
Yeah.
I stopped using Facebook as well. And for the same reason, I just couldn't find a purpose for it in my life. But with that being said, I'm also the same guy that I'm probably not going to join Parler, right? I don't have Twitter, right? So I'm kind of one of these guys that's still a little bit stuck. Like for a guy that started blogging before blogs, I still struggle with technology in this regard. I love the way the medium works. I do. I love the fact that we can have this conversation. I love the fact that, you know, I can send a message in real time to somebody on my cell phone. I love all of that. I think it's amazing. But the social, like, contrived nature of how they're trying to create technological tribalism and the fact that they're doing it so efficiently.
Oh, yeah.
Freaks me out.
Yeah.
It freaks me out. Like, I'm still a guy that longs for the days of tribalism being a group of people doing group things together. Yeah. And I understand that we can't always be around our tribe, right? So, you know, we move and life changes. But I feel that the detrimental nature of tribalism is the thing that is so easily manipulated technologically.
So we had this conversation. Are you familiar with Jack Donovan? He wrote The Way of Men.
Yeah, you know what? I've read all his books.
Yeah. So he was on the show a couple of weeks ago, and we talked a little bit about tribalism. And, you know, tribalism gets a bad rap because of the way it's used nowadays. Your tribe isn't the fact that you are a Democrat or a Republican or a Cleveland Browns fan. Those tribes are way too big to have any kind of emotional attachment to any of those people. It's the small, it's the group of people who, you know, I didn't go to school there, but the group of people that surround Judd Logan.
Yep.
And all of us would do anything for Judd Logan and come together. And man, I tell you what a group of outstanding humans.
Right.
You know, that's your tribe. Those are the people that are going to come and pick you up on the side of the road at 2 a.m. No questions asked.
Yep. 100%. And it's funny that you say that because it's an area that I have a tendency to spend a lot of time thinking about. And I always forget, and I know I'm going to say this wrong, but I'm just going to say it because I think it's funny. I always remember this one law of sociology as Wolff's Law, but I know consciously that Wolff's Law has something to do with the heart, right? So like my physiology and my sociology always get screwed up on this one topic. But the gist of the sociological law is that based on general human evolution, regardless of what your belief is religiously, just as humans have kind of grown along the planet, they have figured out that a human can really only handle about 150 relationships at any one time. And that's relationships from the nice lady at the grocery store that you remember the name of to your most intimate circle, right? So it's not a big number of people. And it goes back to the concept of basically survivable or survival tribalism. The idea that you can only handle the interactions of so many different people in your life, because more than that, it becomes A, distracting, and B, too complex, both emotionally and physically. If you are directly connected, like intimately in your mind connected to 2,000 people, and during a time like a pandemic, a bunch of them are dying.
Yeah.
We're not designed to deal with that. Not really. We're designed to deal with the loss of those closest to us, because they're the ones that we are connected to. Now, social media, the problem for a lot of people, and I've talked about this in the past, so many utopian mindset people that believe that we're going to move towards this Star Trek existence somehow in our lifetime, they have emotionally become so interwound with the web and so interwound with the concept of an idea that when that fabric gets fragmented in New Jersey and they live in Seattle, they feel that emotional break, right? Go ahead.
Absolutely. No, so absolutely. And that's what I've been thinking about. We're here, I'm here in Vermilion, Ohio, and it's a little tourist town here on Lake Erie. Nothing much happens. I've got friends and family here and everything. But social media tells me that I need to be connected to a person who got murdered by a police officer in Minnesota.
Yes.
And although it's a horrible thing that happened to him, I have no connection to the guy who got murdered. I have no connection to the police officer who murdered him. I have no connection to the city, the state, or anyone that was there.
Yeah.
But I should care about that. And I should go out and wreck my Target store because I'm so connected to that because of social media.
Right. And so where this is a real troublesome thing is we see it with these, people trying to make you feel some sort of emotional connection to a thing and people start to feel guilt because they can't get connected.
Yeah.
Right. They're just like, I try and I try to get behind these movements and I try to be supportive, but I don't understand what's wrong with me. What's my guilt? What's my crime for not being able to deal with the fact that, in Portland, some people were killed in protests, or in Finland, someone died saving their child, and we're supposed to feel these stories, and we're supposed to. I have no connection to this. I have connections to the things that are intimate. I have connections to the people that I can reach out to in times of need. And the fact that people want people to feel socially responsible in this false technological tribalism to things that are impossible to connect to is tearing at the very fundamental of what it is to be a person in a country. We get way too much news way too often that is way too horrific. So, if I'm talking to people and I say, okay, when I was in Saudi Arabia, I can paint this crazy story, which is a true story, but I can paint this story where when Daesh, or what we think of as ISIS, was kind of rallying up in the northeast section of the country, they put out a fatwa against the government, which is basically a war against their people, or a war against an individual. And they said, brothers and sisters of the Daesh, if your family member is a part of the political, whatever, you must take swords against them, with some bullshit like this. So this actually happened while I was there. And it was actually one of the shootings that was just down the road from me, where they smoked these guys that were going to blow up a bunch of people. But what happened, an actual story, is a brother got up He was Daesh influenced or ISIS influenced, got up one morning, heard whatever their announcement was for the day, goes up to his brother and just shoots him dead in his house, right? Like just murders him, like brother on brother violence. Okay. And there was no other catalyst up to that moment other than one brother worked for the Saudi government as probably someone that was a clerk in an office, and one brother was radicalized by ISIS. So I can develop that into a story to tell people to get this massive emotional response. Okay. And people be like, oh my God, that's horrific. We have to do something. We have to stand up against the, if I wanted to push it to the right, have to stand up against the radical caliphate, which is the ISIS movement and radical tyranny of terrorism, blah, 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 blah. And I could get those people fired up. It doesn't change the fact that no one knows who the fuck I'm talking about. They don't know. There's two fucking dudes. They have no clue. Yeah. Just two fucking guys, right? And so it's like we have 47 shootings in Chicago on a weekend.
Yeah.
Give me a fucking name, people.
Yeah.
Give me a name. Don't just tell me 47 people got shot, because all that does is stimulate fear and anger. Give me some names. If the left media isn't going to start actually talking about the innocent lives that are taken in Chicago, then don't talk about it at all. Yeah. Because all you're doing is making people on one side hate the people on the other. That's it. It's crazy. There has to either be a solution to a catastrophic problem like Chicago's mass violence right now, or don't talk about it. I don't know what to tell them.
Yeah, and then that's it's not any news that's what it seems to be happening. All these media conglomerates and news shows and social media programs are, they're just working for clicks. They're working for clicks and advertising, and they're just pushing the shit and getting people fighting, because that's what's going to keep people tuning in.
Yeah.
And my wife, God love her, she got rid of our television, our real television.
Right.
I mean, probably it's been 6-7 years ago now. So we still have Netflix and that kind of stuff, but it was so good to just like Facebook, you get away from it. You don't hear that shit anymore. And guess what? Nothing bad happens to me because I don't hear the news.
Yeah. There was Duncan Tressel's quote that was going around about a month ago.
Oh. Go ahead and say that one. I love that quote.
Yeah. And it's like, I'll paraphrase, but it's like some clueless fool is sitting peacefully next to a waterfall, without a cell phone, unaware of how bad he's supposed to feel.
Yeah.
Right. And it's true. It's, when I was traveling a lot, the same, I didn't have cable TV. We have cable TV because it's in every townhouse in our unit. And, don't watch Fox News. Don't watch liberal media. If I feel like I need to be aware of something, I'll YouTube it and watch just the clip from a news source, so I don't have to see the whole show.
Yeah.
And even then, it's kind of gross. So I have a tendency to tune in to guys like Tim Pool, who will just read the highlights of news, right? And then I'll sit back and be like, okay, some of that seems a little clicky. Some of it might actually have some truth to it. But yeah, I was the same thing. I found even with sitcoms, I don't know what age it was, but I just lost interest in sitcoms because I realized that sitcoms were just an extension of the news. Yep. Right. They were creating these very perfect narratives that fit a very specific social demographic. Right. So if you're a hardcore Republican, you're going to watch that show that Tim Allen does. Right. And all they do is sit around talking about how much they hate liberals.
Yeah.
Right. And then if you're somebody that is more, left of center, there's a plethora of TV shows that you can watch that are going to address your social fears and your social justice issues. And you're going to feel like you're vindicated because your false tribe and your invisible, significance is supported by something.
Yeah.
Right. And again, we just get back to the same problem. Invisible people that no one really knows about having experiences that we don't have time to think about.
Yeah. It's funny. And I talked about this with Wendler a couple of days ago. We had met, Jim Wendler and I, at a bar at the Swiss conference in Toronto. Oh, yeah. And we talked about how we didn't talk anything about weightlifting. We talked about these old television shows like Everybody Loves Raymond and Frasier and Cheers that you don't see anymore. Well, I'd found a network that had all those shows on it. So I'd sent him the link to it, and it's this Peacock network. So you can get shows, all the old school, sitcoms that were still really good. But the commercial breaks in between these sitcoms are unbelievable, because the people who are watching these sitcoms can't possibly relate to anything going on in these commercials, because they're so overly diverse and overly very social justicey, and it's just like no 20-year-old liberal in Portland is watching the Peacock network and watching Everybody Loves Raymond. So why are you pushing these commercials towards that audience? It's really odd.
It is, and that's what I started to notice as well. It's Archie Bunker.
Yeah.
Right? So you got Archie Bunker on, and there is nothing socially sensitive about Archie Bunker. Right? There is nothing. The best character on that was Sammy Davis Jr. at times, because he was such a backstop to how far they were trying to push the show and really twist people in a knot, right? But there was an Archie Bunker on one of these networks, and I was like, holy shit, I haven't even thought about this show. And I vaguely remember, like, as a young kid being on like general TV on the 3 channels we had in our town, right? And so I was watching it, and it was funny because even for me, having been so far removed from that style of television, there was extremely shocking moments. Right? Where I was like, holy shit, there's no way they would even try to do that today. But the commercials did not fit. The commercials were not, medication for memory loss and high blood pressure, right? They probably should have been, because that's the generation. And it was commercials that you knew full well that they're trying to program people away from that mindset.
Yeah.
And it's like, it just, again, it makes you wonder how deep the well of manipulation is and who is actually in control of it all, right?
Yeah.
The technological cabal that is spoken about, and, the fact that, for people that were following me on social media a few years ago, I used to post in my stories on Instagram the driver of a car service. You ever catch any of those?
No.
Okay. So they were like, if you missed them, it wasn't even, the chances of seeing it were slim, right? Because I would fly back from the Middle East, and it was only if a certain guy from a car service was sent to pick me up. And this guy, who forever I thought was a former operative of the CIA. So he would pick me up, and I don't know what he cued in on when he would pick me up, but the moment I got into his car, he would start talking about Q, the government, and secret societies. And I had 30 minutes I was stuck in this car, and this guy would not stop talking. And he would see me get in, he'd be like, hello, sir, coming back from a trip? I'm just like, yeah. And he's like, where were you today? Like, all like happy-go-lucky. I was like, well, I actually flew in from the UK. Oh, the UK, sir. Yeah, that's an interesting state with the Brexit. And then we just, right, just get into some serious shit about Brexit. And he's like, was it a layover? And I should have picked up on it quicker, right? And I'd be like, actually, I flew in from the Middle East. That was the very first trip. And the moment that came out of my mouth, this guy, like Q and all this shit I'd never heard of. So I started filming him from the back seat, right? Because it was so crazy. Now, here we are probably 5 years later. A lot of that shit he was talking about has come to fruition and passed.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and I was like, who is this guy driving this car? Remember that movie with Mel Gibson where he was the conspiracy theorist?
Yes. Yeah.
That's who was driving my car. Right. And I would just be like, and for the first couple times, which would have been months apart, he would pick me up and I'd be like, oh God,
here we go.
Here we go. And then after about the 7th or 8th trip, I was like, I hope that guy with the crazy stories picks me up today. And the shit, man, like, but you know what? As crazy as it seemed at the time, he predicted Trump as the president, right? He goes, oh yeah, President Trump, he's going to win. This is why. Lays it all out. And I'm like, yeah, no.
Yeah.
Right? Like in my head, I'm like, no, that's not going to happen, but I appreciate it, and it's funny because the Forrest Gump nature of the work I used to do, when Trump won in 2016, he held his acceptance speech, not all the big stuff, but like the night the election occurred was in the Hilton Midtown in Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
I was in that hotel that night.
Wow.
So that week I was working in Manhattan with the royal family. And I remember like there was a lot of energy behind Trump at that point, and people were starting to wonder if he had a chance. And I remember they took dump trucks. The NYPD has these like garbage dump trucks, garbage trucks, both. And they backed them up in a way that you couldn't even walk between them. And they put them all the way around the Midtown Manhattan. There was, counter groups all over the buildings, police that were there that were very tactical. It was like that for the week leading up to it. And I remember when he won, we were all kind of surprised because we didn't really think he had a chance. Even those that really didn't want Hillary to win, and I was one of them, we were like, it's going to be a tough one to beat the establishment. And I remember he won that night, and it was kind of normal. And then the next night and the next night after that, I was in the heart of those 30,000 person marches and riots that went like down the Avenue of the Americas or whatever it was that went past there down to Trump Tower. So I had to like live in that chaos in the heart of it in Manhattan for like 3 more days before we left. And I remember my room was on the 10th floor of the Midtown. I was talking to my parents the night after the election, just kind of talking about the fact that Trump is now the president. And I remember the conversation getting drowned out by this like thunderous like beat of a sound, but it didn't sound like people. And I'm like, that's a weird sound. It sounded more like just like a reverberation. Went and looked out my window, and it was like 10,000 people going right past the hotel, like chanting and marching and yelling. And I remember then like being very nervous, and I was doing some security detail stuff at the time with our people. So we knew that there could be some issues. We just didn't know how big it was going to be. Like, 4 or 5 days before that happened, one of the guys, New York based security, was like, man, you should change hotels. I'm like, it'll be fine. Right. Should have changed hotels. So yeah. But it's funny looking back on that, because in retrospect, it was relatively peaceful, right? Like, it was 15,000 people marching through New York, and to my memory, nothing burnt or broke. They went and protested outside Trump Tower, and, were displeased for sure. A lot of them were just angry that the opportunity to set history with a female president didn't occur. There was just a lot of stuff like that. Like, it wasn't really racially motivated at that point. There was some people kind of pushing that narrative, but up to that point, Trump wasn't known as a racist in the liberal media. He was just this like braggadocious TV star that made a lot of money in real estate. And so it wasn't that big of a deal. Like, when I look back on it, I was like, man, that could have gone south. Like, that's how I remember it.
Yeah.
3.5 years later, if Trump had won outright last month, or, the start of a month ago, if I had been in Manhattan, I would have watched that motherfucker burn.
Yeah. 100%.
And how does that occur in 3.5 years?
I think a lot of it has to do with what we were talking about, them just amping it up and making them seem like it's worse than it actually is. And bad shit is happening to you. And, I've been a firm, I have said this since the beginning. I used to listen to Trump on Howard Stern probably 15 years ago.
Right.
And he was a New York liberal guy.
Yes.
All the shit he preached during the elections, and I honest to God think he's been acting the whole time.
That is a very good point. Like, for people that actually paid attention to what we think of as pop culture, social or technological pop culture for more than 5 years, we remember Trump was left. Like, and I don't know why people have forgotten this.
Yeah.
Right? It's so easily, because everyone's so new, I guess. Like, people that voted this time 5 years ago were 15,
Yeah.
When he was on Howard Stern, they weren't even born. Right. So it's like, I get why they don't know who Trump is as a president, but Trump was extremely liberal leaning.
Yes.
Yep. Extremely. And he was a big financial supporter of the Democratic Party.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. At one point in his life. He's from New York.
Yep.
New Yorkers were, right, and still are, So when I look back at all that, it's kind of like, man, that's a good point that you make. He's an actor acting a part.
Yeah, and I firmly believe that.
Yeah. So it makes
and he played to that base so perfectly. Because people were so fed up with all the political correctness and all the fake social justice warrior nonsense, and it was just so easy for him to sweep in there and just take all those votes.
100%. And it's funny to see where we go from here, right? Like, what I'm actually looking forward to, I'm looking, because I still don't know how the election's going to turn out. There's some chance that it goes to the Electoral College and gets very messy, and people will be furious. But if it doesn't, if it kind of just continues to go the way it's trending and Biden takes office, I'll tell you what, 3 years from now, to my heart's joy, liberal media and news will be fucking fucked.
Yeah, that looks like the way it'll go. I hope that's the way it'll go.
Yeah, it's because people forget that both CNN and MSNBC were fiscally destitute prior to Trump's administration. And they were getting ready to make massive financial adjustments to how they covered media. And they went from terrible, terrible nightly ratings to two of the biggest in the industry now. And so, because what are they going to do for the next 3.5 years? Are they still going to talk about the way Trump was?
They're going to have to prop him up, because Biden can't do this by himself. They're going to have to prop him up, because they put him there and they can't look wrong.
They can't, and it's like with Fox News, obviously trying to find more of a middle, especially with this election. Like, they still got their extremes. Like, Hannity's always going to be the constitutionalist conservative on their show. Yep. Tucker's always going to be the big question asker, regardless of what it is. But it's pretty clear that Fox is trying to find new ground as well, because I don't think they know what to do without Trump as their flag head. So they're going to have to try to pull in viewers that get disenfranchised from the left. And the only way they can do that is to become somewhat of a moderate middle. But then when you do that, it looks glaringly obvious right now. Right. And what's crazy is, even if they were trying to move to an old, like, CBS moderate middle, right? Like back in the old 60-minute days, when they actually covered news, to do that now actually makes them look full of shit. And what they should, and it's where all news should be, moderate middle, right? Where they don't take partisan sides, and they're just like, all right, so this is what happened. How do you guys feel about it? You deal with it, right?
Yeah.
And that's how it should be. But man, it's tough. It's, people forget that, Murdoch is the owner of Fox News. Murdoch is a guy that owns Sky News, and put bugs in the, royal palace of England. Like they're shady bastards,
I think, over the next maybe 2 election cycles, which is a rough thing to say, but I think what you're going to see is a lot of the baby boomers passing away.
Yeah.
And I think those are the people that are still propping up this 24-hour news cycle, watching the news, where the rest of us, and hey, we're old timers for the majority of the people out there. Even we're getting our news from legitimate source, well, as legitimate as they get, right. YouTube and things like that, podcasts. I don't know how much power these news organizations have the longer we go down this line and the more their viewers start to die off and aren't replaced.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I always base the demographics of a news channel, with like the big news that's on television. I base their demographic off of the commercials, right? Yeah. And people, it's a very, I learned it when I went through university studying multimedia and things of that nature. So that was what I actually went to school for. So for me, I find it extremely fascinating when I'm watching, commercials for heart stents during my news cycle, right? Diabetic medication. The one that's a little concerning, the new move or the new push that's occurring in the United States, because they always put like, drug companies market to the people and then the people are supposed to go ask their doctor about it, right?
Yeah.
Whatever. Yeah, exactly. Schizophrenia. Have you seen I don't know if you've noticed, you don't have television. So there's a huge push that is probably occurring, I would say in a 1-hour news cycle, you might see it 3 times, schizophrenia medication.
Wow.
So I don't know what that means, but I think people that really want to step out of the fog and want to just try to figure out kind of trends. And I've always been a trend guy. I was a trend guy as a coach. And I don't mean trends like fucking Bosu ball backflips. I mean trends like follow the trends of how people respond to things, long term. I believe that successful businesses typically are built in 30 short years, right? That's Sornex always talks about. But that's trends, to see how things ebb and flow over time. And so we're seeing a trend with news cycle. You see it. The medication trend, big pharma, is for someone that I would estimate to be plus 60 years old for the most of the right-leaning news sources. Yeah. The other trend that you're seeing, regardless of which news source you're watching, is an increase in commercials telling people it's okay to pursue their doctors for medication for schizophrenia. Yeah. That's interesting. It's not weird. It's not, because I don't know how prevalent schizophrenia really is. I think you could probably say it's more prevalent than people realize, but how much of it is schizophrenia and how much of it is isolation psychosis? Yeah. And that's something that no one wants to talk about. The idea that if you isolate someone long enough, solitary confinement, lock someone in a prison period, and take away social interaction, it is documented that when that occurs, the instances of audio psychosis increases, right? Yes. Because there's nothing else. There's no stimulation. And so these commercials that are talking about schizophrenia specifically, they use those examples. Why are those people talking about me? Why do I think people are judging me? It's like, Jesus. Are you? Or is that social media networking that's happening? Is that in your head because you have a clinical disruption of your psychological functions? Or is this developing from the influence of the way that people are now living their lives? I know people that in this little mountain town have not left their house other than for fucking groceries in months.
Months. And probably healthy individuals.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. And nobody's talking about that. So, all they're talking about now is the vaccine. And keep wearing your masks and don't, all these Band-Aids that I would have been semi behind. I mean, we closed our gym voluntarily when this first came out because we thought this was a Band-Aid.
Yeah, because we didn't know what we're dealing with.
Right. And now 8 months, 9 months, 10 months into this, we're still not talking about exercise and nutrition and stop being a fat ass and you have to work out. Instead of closing the gyms, and this is coming from a guy who's rabidly anti-government, instead of closing the gyms, how about giving these people a stipend or giving the gyms a stipend and saying, hey, you don't have to charge $100 anymore. You can charge 25 because we're going to cover the rest of that for you to get these people healthy.
Yep. Well, Rachel, who owns Mammoth Strength here in Mammoth, it's a little box style gym. It's not a CrossFit affiliate. Kind of similar to what you do, now that I think about it. We got racks, we got bumper plates, we got, kettlebells, some dumbbells, right? Like it's, I haven't been into your gym, so I can't say everything you got, but that's what we have.
Pretty much it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very straightforward. Got some assault bikes and rowers.
Yep.
When the shit hit the fan, this is a girl this is her gym. She keeps the gym open by working as a bartender in a ski town. Okay. So now both of her industries are closed.
Wow.
What does she do? She's been here 20 years. Right. Yep. And so, when you look at that, and this is where the whole system is broken. She did not qualify as a financial recipient during the first close down because her gym and the way it's structured didn't meet the California state requirements. So here she is. So you know what she had to do? She had to take out a personal loan to pay her mortgage. Right? So now we're in this is our third shutdown for her since this all started. So this is her third time that she's had to close the door. So, sometime next week, I'll be posting videos riding an assault bike in my bedroom, right? That's what's going to happen because that's what happened the last 2 times. And I keep wondering, is this it for her? Right? Now, I know for me, if I wasn't a homeowner in California and I own that gym, this is it. This is it. I would be like, oh, I get how this works. Yeah, Sandpoint, Idaho sounds fantastic right now. Right? Helena, Montana.
Mm-hmm.
I like to ski. I like the outdoors. That sounds like a great place to go because I would still be open. I may be open under different rules and tight regulations and my clients are all wearing masks. Hey, we're open, That's how my mentality with this whole thing has been. It's like I wear a piece of fabric on my face so that the small businesses in Mammoth are open.
Yeah.
That's why I'm wearing it. I'm not wearing it because I think there is this super shield that is protecting the universe from me and me from them. No, I'm wearing it so the government mandated bullshit doesn't shut everyone down.
Yeah.
That's it. I hate to be honest, but that's it.
We're talking about this, and I want to talk to you off the air either today or some other time, but we're moving in 2 years. I said the minute my son throws his last discus, we're moving to Tennessee. And
oh, nice. Yeah.
We've always talked about moving south because, you can't, you deal with the same thing. We got 8 inches of snow. I'm done with the weather. But when we started looking at the next iteration of whatever we're going to do, we looked at how the states handled this.
Yeah.
And the regulations in place, the state taxes, things like that. But I think we're going to do everything in-house on our own property.
Yeah.
And just eliminate any kind of government interceding. Here's my tax dollars, so you can impose restrictions on me and close my business down. I don't understand unless something comes along that changes the way that works out.
No, I think the way that our industries have always been, we're moving in that direction.
Yeah.
Not to put the wrong bug in somebody's ear, but there's aspects of a 1%er's lifestyle that I've always had no problem with. Right. So for me, the idea of forming a club that lifts weights, right. And that people are coming to a thing that isn't a business. It's a social event, right? And and I know that in our society in America, it seems that repressive government moments have created this to occur over and over and over again. But having the 1%er mentality, not in the motorcycle world, but in the weightlifting world, makes sense to me. And if 100%. People want to be a part of that, they can be a part of it. It's not going to be easy to get in, you know. Yep. Nice thing is with my club, anybody can leave, right? Like, I don't care. But what I want is, I want a world that is inclusive, protective, but people that want to be better. And so it's the same methodology as a 1%er club that rides bikes. The difference is your tribalism mentality is getting strong, healthy, and fit, right?
We're 100% in agreement on that. That's exactly the way I've been looking at it. If you notice, for the gym itself, our tag isn't even gym or physical fitness center anymore. It just says social club on there.
Social club. Perfect. Yeah. It's where people can come with a like-minded belief system and feel a sense of camaraderie and freedom, right? You know, and you can't run it like a business, and you know, unfortunately, you got to use donations to keep the doors open and things like that. But I'll tell you what, in our little town right now, if Rachel called us and said, "Hey, we just became a nonprofit, and you know, we're not a business anymore. We just filed, but you have to donate $55 a month to pay for the facility fees." Well, I guess I just became a part of a nonprofit. And I'm okay with that.
And I bet you would spend, I mean, maybe, I'm sure you take care of things the way you should, but it becomes so much more your thing too. We're part of this. This is our gym.
100%. You know, when you have a situation where you have 150 members and they own 150 shares of an operation. You know, so people are probably not familiar with this nationwide, but these issues have occurred before. So in the state of Colorado, the government mandated that you couldn't drink raw milk, right? And a lot of states have these mandates where it goes against a bunch of potential health codes, right? So, you know, you can buy, so in the United States, in certain states, you can buy raw milk to bathe in, right? But you can't drink it. Okay. So, but it's still raw milk, right? It's the same thing.
Right.
Now, what's a loophole? Well, you buy a cow. Right. So what was happening in Colorado a decade ago, and I remember Poliquin used to be one of these guys, is they owned a share of a cow. And they would get the farmer to send them raw milk, because now they weren't purchasing raw milk. They were just drinking the milk that they already owned. And so it sucks that we keep having to find new ways to be normal. But I think if we're moving to this false sense of, you know, and I don't use the word socialist like the iron sickle Russian socialist, even though that always is a fear, right? As a good friend of ours who is a longtime member of the Special Forces said, you only get to vote for communism once. Right. So, you know, you have to kind of always keep that in mind. But even just from this utopian socialism, this idea that everything's going to be perfect and we'll be riding magnetic bullet trains from Iowa to Seattle, right? Like this, I love that idea. I love Star Trek. I think it's a beautiful thing. The problem is there's a lot of steps in between, right?
And a lot of blood,
a lot of blood. No one wants to talk about that, right? Because what people forget is America during the Revolutionary War against the British was utopia, right? It was a utopian break from the way things were run overseas. There was a lot of blood, a lot of dead bodies for America to become America. And everyone's like, oh, that's a disgusting part of our past. And we should do better. Okay. When you figure out how to do that, give me a call, right? Because that's how progression, even positive progression, has gone history over. But with that being said, it's even if the world moved towards this like technological, goggles on your face, no, technological love sensation where everyone just sits in their bubble, there's still going to be a huge number of humans that for whatever psychological reason will require physical contact. And I've talked to people about this. It's not just intimacy, like it's not just sex, like it's not just reproduction. There is a large number of humans, men and women alike, that also need to feel physical discomfort. Yeah. And it has to be tactile. It has to be. And that is not something a VR universe is going to be able to replicate as easily, right? Yeah. The idea of getting, beat around, punched, wrestling, grappling, fighting, chasing, running, all those very instinctual natures of the animalistic side of humans, that is not easily extinguished without the addition of medication. Because that has to be medically sedated out of a certain demographic, right? Sure. And so I think no matter how much of even a modern country wants to move to a passive, pacified gelatin existence of just everything's perfect and everything feels good, there will always be those that want to congregate with physically like-minded people.
I was in my jiu-jitsu class this morning, I was talking to my training partner, and we had been rolling, and my gi had raked across the side of his face and he left a red mark. And he was like, "Oh, geez, you got my eye." And I said, "There's nothing I like better." And it's the weirdest thing, but there's nothing I like better than leaving that class and feeling those gi burns across my face to make me feel like, I did something.
Did something. I remember, gosh, it was a few years back, and I was able to train at a bunch of different places because work was moving me around. But I remember having a particularly difficult sparring session, and we were very fortunate. We were down in southern Massachusetts, which was kind of like North Attleboro area. And the place that I was training at had a really good Muay Thai instructor that would come in, come in once a week. And I remember I wasn't nearly as in good a shape back then as I've gotten into now. I was still kind of transitioning. And I remember the first time I had I don't know what you call it, like a 60% contact sparring session, right? We had the big, we had headgear on, big, oversized gloves. We had kidney, stomach protectors, and shins. And so you still punched in the forehead, right? Because you didn't want to punch someone square in the face. So it had to be forehead contacts on your head strikes. And everything else was like, you just tried to govern. And I'd always been quite powerful, so it wasn't uncommon for me to kick someone hard enough to create a gap or a moment where you felt like this victory, right? That was easy, but I'd gas out. Yeah. And I remember distinctly the very first time that I made in a contact or striking sparring session, the very first time that I gassed out someone I was training with.
Sure, yeah.
And of all the athletic accolades that I've had, and this by no means would be a big thing. The guy could have been having an off day, or he was a fucking potato sack. I don't know at the end of the day, but the one thing I do know is the sense of achievement.
Yes.
That I felt. And it wasn't that I was dominating him. I just was able to work harder, longer than the person that was trying to overcome me physically. Yeah. And when I realized that I'd gassed him out, and he was like starting to like getting pretty faint headed, and then eventually had to tap out, and we had to stop the sparring session. I was like, okay, I've been in that guy's shoes, so I know what that feels like, and it's a very difficult thing psychologically to deal with. Yeah. But being on this side of it was the most rewarding, one of the most rewarding athletic feelings I ever had. And I don't know what it is, right? It's that mano a mano, masculine interaction where there feels like there's really significant consequence to your achievement.
Yeah. No, I understand it totally, because when we're rolling, that was always my thing. I came in, I was 260 pounds when we started, and I would gas out all the time. And then I started learning how to breathe and losing weight, getting better shape. And now guys are gassing out, and I've got you. Now I can do whatever I want to, because we've got 4 more minutes left on that clock, and you're gassed.
And it's a weird sensation where you feel more resilient as a human. You feel more valuable.
Yeah.
You feel like you now have some sort of currency in the world that can't really be measured.
Yeah.
Because that the people you've been training with, for past 6-7 months or maybe a year or more, they've been there every session that you've been there. Yeah. And so it's not like they're not like a bag of donuts on the mat with you. So if you're starting to get to their level of conditioning and then you actually surpass some of them, you literally amongst that group are gaining currency. Yeah. Right. And that is such it's not like you can lift weights and you get the same kickback. You become the strongest guy in the gym. I get that. But this is a different type of currency, because when people look at you and realize that you now are not only a handful physically, that they can't, you're going to be troublesome. They know what they're capable of. They now see, oh my God, this is what this guy's capable of. Okay, we need to keep him in our fold. If he's not a shitty human, which you're obviously not, but there are some, if he's not a shitty human that disrupts the tribe, he now is a person that has increased value that cannot be quantified.
And there's your tribe. That's your that's the Jack Donovan philosophy on tribalism. Can you guard the perimeter? Are you the difference was, are you a good man, or are you good at being a man? And there's a difference between them.
That's the absolute truth. It's, and they've looked at some of these social studies in terms of like psychological, demographic, and sociological correlations with groups. The military is a great example. Team sports is a great example, as long as they stay off the media. What they've found is, over time, groups of individuals that have a solitary or like-minded purpose, that purpose will always circumvent or override any political, religious, or racial difference.
Yes.
Right. So, and no one wants to talk about this, because I think it disrupts the narrative. But maybe because we came from sports, we have always just accepted it as normal. Yeah. When I played sports all through college, I can go back and consciously be like, oh yeah, that girl that I used to hang out with every day, she was African-American, or she was Black because she was from the islands and she sprinted, or that girl I had a crush on was from Jamaica. Like, I can go back and I can consciously look at these people and I can put them in their perfect little check boxes on a piece of paper for voting reasons or demographics. But when I go back, I don't have a memory of differences. Mm-hmm. Like, when I think of my teammates and the people that some of them I went through some hard shit with, and they were at my bedside through horrific injuries, or, I think back to some of the people that were calling me on the phone, or I was calling them when they were going through really dark times.
Yeah.
They weren't racially different than I was.
Yeah.
Right? Because we were all so tightly wound.
Yeah.
Like, we were human beings that had this one belief system and one group of, generalized experiences happening to us all. Now, we all came from different backgrounds, but those backgrounds were irrelevant to who we were as people. And so for me, it's always been very difficult. I almost have to step out of myself to this day to kind of understand the racial battles that are occurring between people, because I'll see these racial battles happen on social media or media, and I'm just like, what the F is going on with these people? And then I'll get a message, 10 minutes later, coincidentally, from one of my really good friends from Toronto, Nicole, who is a Black Canadian of multiracial background. And she is one of the most important human people that I know, period. Yeah. Right. And so I'll get a message from her and it just kind of regrounds me to, okay, this is their problem that these people can't seem to figure out. But there are some of us in this country and north of the border that we're not having this fight. Yes. Right. We're unified in what we understand as a problem. Is there racial inequality? Yes. Right. But in my tribe, in my people that I'm like connected to, we don't have that.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
They'll tell me stories about the shit they've dealt with. Like I have really close friends that are Native Canadians, and the horrific past of the Native American cultures in both the United States and Canada are hard to speak about because they're so horrific. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But that individual whose ancestry was massacred, that individual is not them to me. That person is somebody that I care deeply about. So I can't identify with their ancestry. I can't. I can hear it like a narrative. I can hear it like a story. I can try to be empathetic to what they're saying. I'll stand beside them when the abuse is affecting them as an individual. But I'm not going to sit here and say that I identify with the massacres of the Native Canadians in the 1900s. Are you fucking high? How can I say that? Right? Like I have no right nor connection to that person. But if someone fucks with them,
yes,
that is me. Yeah. And there is no racial divide there. That they are them, they are me, I am them. And I think that's where people have to get to. I can't solve the problems in Saudi Arabia. Right. But when the family I work for and who I've become very bonded to gets imprisoned, which some of them are, that is very hard for me to deal with.
Yes. Yeah.
But I can't identify with the massacres of northeastern Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. We have a girl in the gym who is one of my favorite people on the planet. And when I worked as a corrections officer, she worked with me. So we've known each other for 20 plus years. And there's a lot of fucking with each other that goes back and forth because she's a friend. So she told me a while back that she didn't know how to swim. And when I asked her why, she said, because Black people don't float.
Right.
Well, that was her joke, and I thought it was funny. And, so now anytime we bring up swimming, another woman in the gym is a big swim coach. All her kids swim. And I said, well, that's not really a sport because there's no Black people in it. And, she thought it was hysterical. So then we started back and forth with the Black people not being able to swim thing. She's my good friend. I love her to death. Well, she leaves and I get a message from one of the other members who is literally giving me this page-long history of why Black people traditionally don't swim and all this stuff. And I'm just like, so I didn't really respond to it. I just showed it to my friend and she just, wow, I'm glad she had my back. You racist motherfucker.
Yeah, exactly.
Fuck, man. This is what you want. You want to be able to talk to your friends and joke and laugh and love each other and not have to worry about, am I offending this person? And God, if I ever offended her, she'd be the first motherfucker to tell me that I offended her.
100%. Like growing up where I did in rural Canada, we're predominantly an immigrant town. So the immigrants were about as diverse as you can get. What a lot of people don't realize about Canada, and especially British Columbia in particular. So growing up in the town, 2,000 people, is in North America is one of two of the earliest Sikh, which is really not something to think of, right? Sikh temples built in North America was in our logging town in the 1800s. Wow. Like it doesn't make sense, right? Okay, you're like, how did they get there? Why did they build a temple? Why was there such a big Sikh culture? Why was the Indo-Canadian population and to some degree the Pakistani population so big there? I don't know. There's a lot of variables that go into that. The Indo-Canadian population is predominantly an effect of the British Royal or British rule. So Britain had invaded India, a lot of East Indian culture had moved to the UK, which then by default they end up going to Canada for a lot of reasons. So I grew up in a town that was not even a spot on the map at the time, but 40% of our town was Eastern Indian, right? So, Indo-Canadian in particular, when you look at that, you're like, okay, so 40% of the people I grew up with were already ethnically completely different, spoke a completely different language in their homes, had a completely different fundamental belief system, and they were brown, right? So that is what I knew from the time I was born. I never understood much other than that. And was there a lot of bullshit back and forth between the uneducated? Yes, right? But where wasn't the bullshit between your core group of people that you played basketball with, volleyball with, you went through the things with, you went to birthday parties, you learned about their culture? To this day, some of my first and oldest friends are from this group of people. So I have a strong affinity to that culture. I find it fascinating. And it's purely a byproduct of growing up in it and not seeing it as different. And it's funny because with that, there was also the reverse. So, a lot like a city like Cleveland, we had a lot of Ukrainian, Polish, Russian, even though it's hard to tell sometimes because they manipulated how they got into the country. It's just the truth, because there are limitations and visas. But those cultures in our town. So for me, my family changed its last name when my grandparents and great-grandparents immigrated to North America on my dad's side. So the original spelling of my last name was traditional German. It was Woodske, right? That's how it's pronounced. Had some Z's in there and some other stuff. But it also is very similar to a Polish last name that was very prevalent. Now, even though they changed it and anglicized it to Woodske, which is O's and D's and E's, the pronunciation still sounds extremely Polish. Now, what people don't like to acknowledge is the fact that, especially in Canada, in my generation, being born in the late 70s, racial anti-Polish sentiment and anti-Ukrainian sentiment was very prevalent, right? So for someone to look at someone like me as a kid, and I'm talking as a kid, having adults call me Dombrowski, right? Because Dombrowski was a Polish slang for just a dumb Polak, right? And I grew up, so as a kid, I grew up being referred to, and it just depended on who it was. If they weren't 100% sure, but they thought I was Ukrainian for some reason, just by how I looked, they would make anti-Ukrainian slur, right? If they heard my last name, not realizing that it was traditionally German, they would call me a dumb Polak. They would make some Polish slur, right? Yeah. And one of my good friends who was a Polish immigrant, discus thrower from Canada, this is a guy, this is a true story. This is a guy, his mom had cancer back in probably 04, 05. He pushed a car for 25 miles to raise money for his mom's cancer treatment. He also at one time had the world record for the wash machine throw, right? So obviously he was a freak of nature, but obviously Polish name, Polish last name. He didn't know, like a lot of us didn't know. He heard Woodske, assumed I was Polish as well. Like I thought I was Polish majority of my life. And we were in Australia with Team Canada, and we were having drinks with a bunch of other athletes. And this guy was a wrecking machine. Like, I'm not talking somebody that was just like kind of tough. He was a hardened Polish immigrant, right? That came to Canada with just his mother. And he was actually a really good martial artist too, which no one knew, but he was.
What was his name offhand?
Darius?
I know Darius.
Yeah, right? Like
I threw with him.
Yeah, right? Highland Games. Big, strong dude.
Darius was a gorilla.
A gorilla, right? I thought you might know him, but I wasn't. I was like, I wonder what he's been up to since then. And I remember we were sitting in this bar, and this guy, just out of nowhere, just drops this horrific Polish joke. Horrific. But somehow it's acceptable, right?
Yeah, right.
Like you wouldn't say that about any other race in the room. Yep. But you make the, and I mean horrific. Like if anyone knows the way that people that have been spoken about of Polish descent, it's fucking bad. And I remember I was kind of leaning back, and I know I'm not Polish, right? I know I've been treated inappropriately since youth, but I knew I wasn't. I mean, but it's still extremely bothersome because I've been called a dumb Polak my whole life. And I remember I was just about to lean forward and just be like, you fucking ignorant bastard, right? And I remember clearly as I was leaning forward, Darius is sitting next to me, right? Who is a Polish immigrant.
Yeah.
And I remember just feeling his hand come out and just stop me. And I look over at him and he just looks over at me like with a side eye and just kind of smiles and just shakes his head and shrugs his shoulders. And at that moment, I realized, I'm like, this guy has been through so much in his life just to get to where we were sitting at that moment, that no matter how horrific it seemed to me at that moment that this guy was making this comment or this joke, Darius was like the real voice of reason, the real solidified experienced person was. And I could tell in that moment where he was just like, do you realize how insignificant this is compared to what I've been through?
Yes.
You know, and that's where I just kind of sat back and I was like, God damn, there's some people that have been through some shit, you know, and it's not a one or the other scenario. It's, you got to look at the individual and you have to look at them as a person, not as a race or a state or a religious or a political belief, but what has that person been through?
Yeah.
And that was an eye opener for me because I was just like, holy shit, like this guy's a bigger man than I am in this moment, you know?
And that's one of the things that is so screwed up about where we are right now as a country, because we're all locked in our homes. We're all kept from having social interactions with people. We're all forced to wear masks so you can't see our face. So the only real interactions we have with anyone are through social media. And like we talked earlier, someone puts a shitty comment on one of your posts. Who the fuck are they? What have they done with their lives? You know, 9 times out of 10, you go to their profile and you look at them and just go, oh, now I get why this guy's a shithead.
Yep.
So that's why I really won't interact with negative commenters at all, because at the risk of sounding like an arrogant fucker, I'm way above that. You know, you've got your own problems, dude. If you need to talk shit on my post, great. You know, it's not going to bother me at all.
You know, and add in the unusual variable that it's sophisticated AI technology.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
yeah. 100%.
And people have to realize that if you have enough traction on your social media, right? And luckily I'm not there. You know, I don't know if I want to get there, but if you have enough traction on your social media and the algorithm understands that you're an influencer, and I'm not talking like you're selling bottles of shampoo. I mean, like when you have a statement, you're actually affecting people's thoughts.
Yes, right.
AI is going to be in your comment section.
Yeah.
And it's going to be in there in a way that people don't realize. And it's not there to fuck with you per se, but it will absolutely start interacting with the people in your comment section. And it's kind of disturbing, but it's where we're at, right? It's subversion. It's, you know, the CCP and the Russian governments have been doing this forever, right?
Yeah.
They went from doing it in our newspapers in the Second World War, right? Like people forget that the Russians took out ad space in American newspapers that was anti-involvement in the Second World War because they didn't want us there, right? Because they wanted that big chunk of Europe for themselves. And the fact that they're doing it today through social media, it's not a mystery.
No.
Nor should it be something that is even considered to be a conspiracy. It's tradecraft of a modern era of espionage.
Yeah.
That's all it is. You know, it's not magical. It's not complicated. It's just reality.
Yeah, that's where we're at. It's a crazy landscape. Before I let you go, I need to ask you the big question that we should have talked about this whole time. We've recovered alien aircraft.
Not only have we recovered alien aircraft, we've got the monolith in Utah that was there and now is gone. Right.
Oh, and that was just the artist taking it away,
just taking it away, just magically, but no one knows how they did it. Right. So not only does the monolith vanish from Utah, well, now a bunch of people are there looking at it and they don't know how it disappeared. So I saw some bullshit article just came out and said that it was stolen. Mm-hmm. It wasn't stolen. It fucking shot into space is what it did, and
maybe it was a weather balloon,
Yeah, it was totally a weather balloon. That's always the case. It's like, so where I live here in California, we're right on the Nevada state line, but we're also right next to two of the biggest Air Force bases in the United States, right? We have Fallon to the north and we have Crystal Lake to the south, right? But we're also, what are we? We're 170 miles from Rachel, Nevada, which is the boundary of Area 51 and where the infamous black mailbox is. Right. So all of that is where I live. So Air Force and naval aircraft are pretty common sight around here. But something that is really weird is there is a photographer that lives in town and he works at one of the local breakfast places. And his specialty is landscape photography and sky photography, which he takes out in the desert. So, drives an hour and a half down to Death Valley and takes all these time-lapse stargazing, stuff like this from what are referred to as the Alabama Hills. So back in April-ish, we were talking with him and we're like, hey, how you holding up? What are you up to? He's like, he goes, I've been spending almost all my nights doing photography in the desert. He goes, it's been really strange. And he's a funny guy, right? Because he's just very unassuming. He's not, he's not one or the other. He's just a dude. And so he goes, he's got a bit of an accent. So at first I wasn't quite sure what he was saying, and he goes, aliens and craft. And he goes, it's just strange, man. And I'm like, aliens, and that was the part that I heard. So I'm like, okay, start over. He goes, when I started going out into the desert, he goes, we always had some like satellite. He goes, like satellite or weird stuff happened. He goes, but when the pandemic hit and they locked us down, he goes, we've been seeing some weird stuff. And I'm like, what kind of weird stuff? He goes, well, and Megan's with me, right? So he's kind of joking about it. He goes, it's so often, he goes, that I'm now taking girls down there to impress them on dates. And I'm like, what? He goes, yeah. He goes, every single night we get some sort of recording of an aircraft coming out of the desert floor, aircrafts flying over the desert, things that can't be explained. They got buzzed. He took a chick up there and she almost panicked to death. They got buzzed by some sort of object that lit them up that had no sound and just light. He goes, and it was like within 60 feet of their heads, came right down to them. And she completely panicked. I'm like, what did you do? He goes, I see it every night. Yeah. He goes, it's not scary anymore. So he gave me a couple videos that were kind of hard to comprehend.
Were those the ones you sent me?
Yeah, the floating disc over Bishop, right? Yeah. Makes no sound. Yeah. He said that was a weird one. He was on the way out to do the filming that night and he was eating in his car and he saw it coming. He's like, whoa. And he has like high-end gear, right? Went to grab one of his cameras. None of the batteries were working. So the only thing that was working was a cell phone, like just one of those classic UFO stories, but at least he got it on his cell phone. He said the strangest one that he showed me was a photograph. So they were doing a photograph of the sky and they could see that there was something there, but it was like kind of like black on black. And it was like, there's no ambient light and the stars weren't really out yet, but there was like points. So they took a bunch of like photographs of it. And when they took it home to filter it, what they realized is that the missing light, I don't know a lot about photography, but the way he described it is the missing light in the image was actually just an object that was creating space missing in the photograph. He goes, at first they're like, oh, that was kind of weird. Something was flying over. But then they were using massive telescopic lenses, right? When they took the photo. So his buddy, who, is like really into that side of stuff, is like, he goes, you know what? He goes, that was a long ways away, which means it was really big.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So my buddy they did the math, they figured it out, and they estimate from point to point was like 15 miles long.
Wow.
So there was some sort of, could it be a black hole? I don't know, but there was some sort of negative light in the sky that was massive. And he said that he didn't really think much of it other than they were seeing weird shit until he was driving through Death Valley. And if anyone's ever driven through northwestern Death Valley, it is desolate. There's like one highway that just goes and there's no one out there. And this wasn't a main highway. It's not like the one that goes by Rachel, Nevada. So he said he was out driving. He goes, just going to do his filming, get set up in the Alabama hills. And he knows the area like the back of his hand, and out of nowhere, he got pulled over. And it was not a police car. It was military personnel. And so they stop him. And his first instinct was, oh, this is weird, right?
Yeah.
And so they come up and they were really polite, but they're just like, hey, what's going on? And he's like, oh, just out in the desert doing some photography. And they kind of look him over and look at his gear. And they're like, this area is closed. He's like, oh, I didn't know that. I thought only some of the national parks were closed, which was not the case at the time. And they're like, no, this whole area is actually kind of shut down right now. That's how they said it. They said, we're actually got about a 26-mile radius that is off limits.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, I had no idea. He's like, they're like, don't worry about it. Just turn around, head home. No big deal. They just kind of blew it off, right? But just before the guy left, he kind of turned his back and he's like, you running any drones? And he's like, no, I just do skylight photography from the ground. They're like, oh, okay, good deal. Good. Just needed to know. That's all he said. Like, no. So he knows the area well. So he just like books it back west, hangs left on this dirt road and goes back up into the mountains. Right.
Yeah.
And he said the sky lit up that night like he's never seen.
No shit.
Yeah. He said there was shit flying around that he can't even quantify. He said he had the video he sent me was a lot like the pill or whatever, the Tic Tac.
Yeah.
So he sent me a Tic Tac video, and that thing is changing direction and shooting around his lens frame, and it, I don't know what distance it's traveling, a mile or 100 feet. I can't tell, but I know they use big lenses for what they do out there. But they couldn't keep it. Like, it was moving so fast down towards the earth and then back up again that they were having a hard time following it with their lenses. And he said, it's just how it's been. He said that, so you'll love this. Throw a little alien twist into this. So all this has been going on. This summer, I stop in Rachel, Nevada, right? So I'm driving through. We pull into the Alien Cafe. And there's a very unique dude working there, of course. And so we're just kind of shooting the shit, and I'm asking him, what he thinks of everything that's going on alien wise. And he goes, well, it's just matter of fact, right? He's like, well, he goes, the pandemic is interesting. We're not too worried about it out here. There's one business in 100 miles. He goes, but, from all the sources that we have, it's pretty clear that this whole thing has been somewhat of a cover up because they're just leaving the planet. And that was what he believes. Like, whatever going on, they believe that this whole thing has been an attempt to suppress air travel and human travel enough for this mass exodus.
It makes more sense than anything I've heard so far.
I know, and that's what's so crazy, right? Even to the argument that, I remember clearly coming to because on Thursdays used to be our heavy traffic area here for aircraft out of LAX. And I remember it would have been end of February, start of April, having the realization that I hadn't seen a plane fly over in weeks and weeks and weeks. Yeah. And that was really weird, because what made me realize it is I was standing outside and I saw a single jet stream going in a very weird direction that I'd never seen. And I'm like, oh, so A, that's the first jet stream I've seen in weeks. And B, why is it going that way? Right. So then I was like, whatever. But I happened to be in my car that day driving. and there was 5 more jet streams all going the same direction. And I was like, that's messed up. But it made no sense, right? It wasn't the typical crisscross shit that we saw every day. It was just 5 jet streams heading straight north. And I was like, well, I know no one's supposed to be flying, and I know the border to Canada's closed. So what is it? You know? Yeah. Makes me wonder. Definitely makes me wonder.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've solved the world's problems, and
once again,
we did good. Hey, I'm gonna talk to you. We've done enough for today, but I'll shoot you a message. I want to talk to you about Tennessee and what we're thinking about doing, and
badass.
get
That'd
your
be great.
opinion on it. So
that'd be kick-ass.
Thank you so much for doing this. I'd love to do it again, and hopefully the next time we will be out of this mess.
I hope so too, and maybe face to face, which is always awesome.
Absolutely. All right, this has been Refined Savage with Derek Woodske. See ya.